Let's get to Leicester now, who remain winless in the Premier League this season. They were actually booed off at full-time following yesterday's home defeat to Southampton. So it is early days, Miguel, but this is a club that kind of needs a bit of a refresh, doesn't it, really? But I guess they're going to have to do a lot of selling first, but there's not long left. Yeah,
it almost feels like it's kind of one of those fighting the tide situations that really they should be building on what they had, which which was pretty much the Premier League's model club for about half a decade. But suddenly they've been caught out by circumstances. There is some pressure to sell, not just in terms of their situation, but also from the players, and that with Fofana being the biggest. And that creates, I suppose, multiple issues in that regard. It means that Rodgers really goes into the season, again, kind of with circumstances he wouldn't want, having to respond all the time. And this could be a very, very tricky campaign, which could well be dictated by what happens in the next 2 weeks, not just as regards players going, and we do expect Fofana to go to Chelsea, I think, but also who they bring in after that, because there's not much time. It suddenly goes against all the planning that we've praised Leicester for so long.
Yeah, they feel like they're in a little bit of disarray at the moment. Is there anything behind that? What do you think, Darren?
Well, even before this summer, their defensive record wasn't great. I think it was one clean sheet in something like 24, 25 games, and they've started this season like they ended the last. I think as far as the key players are concerned, Fofana, as we know, is an issue. Youri Tielemans won't sign a new contract. James Maddison has interest from outside the club. So, and these guys are all very talented, very capable, but very sought after as well. And when you have that uncertainty within a squad, on the one hand you can say, look, players just want to play and get on with their jobs, it's not their business. But I think it does affect results when you've got players who have one eye on seeing if they can get that move. My concern is that other clubs may look at Brendan Rodgers and say, look, if it's not going the way you expect it to, would you like to come and join us? And that would be a shame, because Leicester do things the right way. They've got a fantastic setup behind the scenes, and I think that they can, if there is anyone to help them to rebuild, if you like, it is Brendan Rodgers.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know what happens, come Christmas. Look, let's bring in Charlotte Duncker from The Times now, who was at the King Power yesterday. Good morning to you, Charlotte. You all right?
Yeah, good, thank you. How are you?
Charlotte.
Well, thank you. Look, we just spoke a little bit about Wesley Fofana. That deal looks like it might get over the line for Chelsea. What about Youri Tielemans as well? As Darren mentioned, he was not in the right frame of mind, according to Brendan Rodgers. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think when Rodgers was explaining his team selection, I think Tielemans, he said, was more tactical. He wanted to go with James Maddison and Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall because he said he's been impressed with what he's seen with them in pre-season. And the slight difference with Tielemans was obviously that he was on the bench and he did come on in the second half. But I think what you've got to look at there is Tielemans was, as I understand, one of the players they semi-expected to sell this summer. They have that model, don't they, where they like to sell one of their big names, make a lot of money from it, and then reinvest that money back into the squad and bring in new signings. What we've seen at Leicester this summer is that they haven't had that setup, and we've seen no outfield players come into the squad, and they've started the season the way they have. They were booed off. There's that discontent rising around the fans. So I think, as I understand it, there's been no official bid for Tielemans. He's one of them players that they would be willing to get rid of. I know you've probably heard Rodgers say Fofana, Maddison, etc. aren't for sale. As I understand, that's not the club's stance on Tielemans, but as it is at the moment, no one's made an official bid for him. So he's there and he was sat on the bench yesterday.
Talk to us about Fofana, Charlotte, because I would imagine he picked up the copy of the Daily Mail on Saturday morning, Sami Mokbel's piece, well informed, I've got to say, Sami Mokbel, as we know, about Chelsea having an interest in Harry Maguire. And I wonder if that might have not put him in the right frame of mind to play. But also, how risky is... Well, first of all, what do you think of that? And also, how risky is the strategy of dropping players, particularly with Leicester's form not as good as they would want it to be right now?
From everything Rodgers has said with regards to Fofana, I think he said it was a straightforward decision to drop him. I believe there's been a few incidents in the run-up to the game. They decided it was best because he wasn't in the right frame of mind to play. He was actually sat just a few rows in front of the press box with his partner, and I think there's a viral video that's gone around of him not celebrating when Leicester scored. He did clap, he didn't jump up, but yeah, I think it's one of them, the fans were singing that he wanted out, the away fans I might add, not the home fans. So so he had to sit there in the stand and watch. I think it was probably the right decision not to play him. I don't think that Leicester lost that game because he wasn't involved. You look at James Maddison, he's, like you mentioned, had lots of interest as well. Newcastle put in bids for him and Leicester rejected those bids. He, in my opinion, has still started this season all right. He scored a good free kick yesterday. So I think it is coming down to the individual players. Rodgers keeps mentioning Fofana's age. He's very young, isn't he? 21 years old. He said he can see why he'd be distracted, the lure of going to a Champions League club, earning a lot more money and the potential that might bring to him. So I wouldn't be surprised if he isn't involved again next weekend against Chelsea. And it'll be interesting to see where he ends up at the end of the window, because I've got a feeling they're going to come back in with another bid. Just
on that, Charlotte, I mean, I suppose psychology, as you've mentioned there, is so key to this. And it's not just about Leicester in that regard, it's also about Southampton, because I think nearly everyone expected them to have a difficult season, whereas they seem to show resilience yesterday. How did you see the two teams mentally, and any contrast between them?
Yeah, definitely. I think Che Adams said afterwards in his post-match interview that Hasenhüttl's given them this right to get excited and have the right mentality when they go behind, that they can fight back. Whereas what I've seen with Leicester since the start of the season is once they went 2-0 up against Brentford, didn't they, in their first home game? They threw that away. At Arsenal last weekend, as soon as they'd scored and there was that glimmer of hope they could get back in the game, they conceded twice again. And then yesterday, as they were in control of the game, they took the lead. As soon as they'd scored, it was like they didn't know how to protect the lead. The heads sort of go, and Rodgers brought in the word yesterday. He said there's a certain anxiety around the club and around the team, and he thinks this anxiety that's around the club at the moment, assuming in the words of like transfers, all the negative talk that's been going on about that, star players being linked with moves away from the club, he thinks that that's seeping into the team. So as a manager, that's his job to try and sort that out and get their head straight, because at times they've played some good football. I think they've struggled a bit in the final third, but they just can't seem to get over the line. And for me, that's surely got to be a mentality issue as much as anything else.
Ironically, Charlotte, it's only Southampton that have dropped more points than Leicester from winning positions as well, since the start of last season. But the fact that they're yet to spend in this window, does that make any sense to you whatsoever?
I think if Brendan Rodgers was to give his honest opinion on that, I think he'd also say it doesn't make any sense. But every time we've spoken to him since the start of the season, he said he trusts the owners. It's the situation that they're in. He said he had spent his summer holidays messaging players that he wanted at the club, trying to see if they wanted to join. He's gone back to Seagrave on the first day of pre-season training and been told it's unlikely that those deals are going to be able to happen. It's the financial model in terms of they're needing to, like we said, sell those players to bring players in. No one's coming for Tielemans. You've got a few fringe players. Vestergaard, there was interest in him, but he's decided that he wants to stay in his place. So in terms of like balancing the books and getting the money in, that's what, as we understand it, why they haven't been able to bring anyone in. So it makes sense from that point of view, but in terms of them wanting to develop as a team and improve on last season, it's hard to see how they're going to be able to do that without a refresh of the squad.